Hi, I'm Vera. That night, my little girl was bleeding, barely breathing, and the doctor just stood there. He said he couldn't touch her until a legal father signed the papers. I begged. I screamed. I dropped to my knees on that cold hospital floor, but all they saw was a woman without a man. They turned their backs while my daughter cried for help. So I wiped my tears and walked out. When I came back 24 hours later, I wasn't alone. And the man who walked beside me made every one of them regret what they'd done. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Because what you're about to hear isn't just my story. It's what happens when a mother's love is treated like paperwork. It was one of those nights when the sky itself seemed angry. Rain hammered the windshield, the wipers swaying like tired arms fighting a losing battle. I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel, squinting through the blur of headlights. And my little girl, Lucine, sat in the back seat, her small fingers gripping her stuffed fox. She was 6. She was everything. We had been driving home from her dance recital when the car ahead braked too hard. I turned the wheel, heard the tires scream, and then glass. The airbag exploded, the world spun, and all I could think was, please, not her. When I finally came to, the car was in a ditch, steam curling from the hood. Lucine was crying softly, clutching her side. Her hand came away red. I tore off my jacket, pressed it against her wound, whispering, "You're okay, baby. You're okay." The rain drowned out her sobs, the highway lights blurring like stars underwater. Somehow I got the car started again. Every second mattered. I drove with one hand and held her tiny arm with the other, whispering prayers I hadn't said in years. The hospital appeared through the downpour like salvation, a tall building of glass and light. I pulled into the emergency bay, jumped out, and screamed for help. 2 nurses rushed over, pushing a gurney. I followed as they wheeled Lucine inside, breathless, soaked to the bone. At the reception counter, a nurse slid a clipboard toward me. "Fill this out, please." I scribbled my name, my daughter's name, and every detail I could remember. When I reached the line that said father's information, I hesitated. My hand froze. That section had always been blank. The nurse looked at me. "Ma'am, we need the legal guardian's signature." "I'm her mother," I said, voice shaking. "Her only parent. Please, she's bleeding." Before I could finish, a man in a white coat appeared. His badge read, Dr. Cray. He glanced at the form, then at me. His tone was calm, practiced. "You're not married, correct? No father on record?" "She doesn't have one," I said, panic rising. "I'm her parent. I'm right here." He sighed, like I was a problem on his schedule. "Without a legal guardian, we can't authorize surgery on a minor. It's hospital policy." I stared at him, not understanding. "She's dying. What do you mean, policy?" He turned to the nurse. "Page legal. I don't want this coming back on us." I reached for his arm. "Please, you're a doctor. You took an oath." He pulled away. "And I also have a license I'd like to keep." Lucine's breathing grew shallow. The heart monitor beeped faster, uneven. My own heartbeat echoed it. "You can't just stand there," I said, my voice cracking. "Do something!" The nurse's eyes darted between me and the doctor. Her lips trembled. She whispered, "If I help without authorization, I could lose my job." I slammed my palms on the counter. "Then lose it! Save her!" No one moved. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and rain. Behind me, Lucine's soft cries turned into quiet gasps. I dropped to my knees, begging. "Please, she's my child." The hospital lawyer arrived, a woman in a gray suit, hair tied back so tight it looked painful. She didn't look at me, just the paper. "No signature, no treatment, liability issues. You'll need to contact the father or transfer to another facility." "The father doesn't exist," I shouted. "You're wasting time." Dr. Cray's voice cut through the chaos. Then find another hospital, ma'am. I looked at the monitor. The line was flattening. My daughter's lips turned pale, her eyes glassy. I pressed my hands against the glass window of the trauma room as they rolled her away. No urgency, no compassion, just paperwork and procedure. My body went numb. My thoughts stopped. Somewhere far away, I heard the rain hitting the roof again, steady, heartless. I think I screamed. I'm not sure. The sound that came out of me didn't feel human. It echoed down the sterile hallway until it was swallowed by the hum of machines. Then, silence. I stood up slowly, every part of me trembling. I looked around at their faces, blank, professional, untouched. I saw nothing human in any of them. Something inside me cracked open. But it wasn't grief anymore. It was rage, cold and focused. I wiped the blood from my hands onto my jeans, the fabric stiff with rain and tears. I reached for the clipboard on the counter, the one they had cared about more than my daughter, and ripped off the top sheet. Her name. My name. Their indifference in ink. I folded it once, tucked it under my arm, and walked toward the sliding doors. The rain hit me again, cold and relentless, but I didn't flinch. The world had already gone colder than that. The rain hadn't stopped. It chased me down the highway like a shadow I couldn't outrun. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, the stolen hospital chart wedged between the passenger seat and the console. In the rearview mirror, the red emergency sign shrank into the night until it was just another blur of light swallowed by darkness. Lucine lay in the back seat, her small chest rising and falling beneath my coat. I kept glancing at her in the mirror, whispering her name, just to remind myself she was still breathing. Every breath she took sounded like a struggle, like her lungs were fighting to stay part of this world. I drove with no destination in mind, just away from the people who had turned us into a form they could deny. The rain slicked the road, each mile stretching longer than the one before. When I finally saw the glowing vacancy sign flickering over a roadside motel, I pulled in. The building looked forgotten, paint peeling, only one window lit, but it was shelter. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old coffee. The man at the desk didn't ask questions when he saw the blood on my sleeve. He slid the key across the counter and said quietly, "Room 4. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned not to get involved. I carried Lucine inside. She stirred a little when the cold air hit her face. I laid her down on the faded bedspread and turned on the bedside lamp. The yellow light made her skin look too pale. My fingers shook as I cleaned the cut on her side, whispering every word of comfort I could remember. "You're okay, sweetheart. Mom's here. Just breathe for me." There was a small box of tissues on the nightstand. I grabbed one, pressed it against her wound, and watched it turn red. I froze, staring at that one square of paper soaking up her blood. Something in me refused to throw it away. I folded it carefully, as if it were something sacred, and tucked it into my coat pocket. I didn't sleep. The clock on the wall ticked louder with every second. When the storm outside softened to a drizzle, I started making calls. I found a local phone book, flipped to the hospital section, and dialed number after number. "Do you accept minors without a father's consent?" I asked the first operator. "Ma'am, all minors must have a legal guardian." I hung up. The next hospital said the same thing. And the next. And the next. Each call ended with the same cold phrase, like they were all reading from the same script. By the fifth one, my voice broke. I slammed the phone down and covered my face. I turned on the motel's old answering machine, pressed record, and whispered, "If something happens to me or to my daughter, this is not an accident." My voice shook, but it was clear enough. I hit save. It was evidence. Or maybe it was a goodbye I wasn't ready to say out loud. As the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, my phone rang. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was someone offering help. But when I answered, a calm voice said, "Mrs. Rowe, this is the hospital administrator." I sat up straight. "Is my daughter—" He interrupted. "We've documented that you left the premises with a minor patient. That constitutes abandonment. We've reported the incident to Child Protective Services." My throat closed. "You left my child to die!" "Ma'am, please lower your voice. You refuse to comply with hospital policy. We have to protect ourselves legally." The call ended before I could respond. The phone slipped from my hand. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The fury came like a wave, hot and blinding. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but Lucine stirred in her sleep, whispering, "Mommy?" I swallowed my rage and went to her. She looked so small, her hair sticking to her forehead. I brushed it back and forced a smile. "I'm here, baby." Her eyelids fluttered. "Mommy, did I do something bad?" That broke me. I knelt beside her, pressing her tiny hand to my chest. "No, sweetheart. You did everything right. Everything." My voice cracked, but I meant every word. That promise, the one I whispered into her hair, became my vow. They had turned my child into a case number. I was going to turn it back into a name. When she drifted off again, I sat by the window. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened. I pulled the stolen hospital chart from my bag and opened it. My eyes scanned the form, page after page of printed lies. When I reached the line for legal father, I froze. There was a name there. It wasn't blank. Redden Voss. I whispered it out loud, as if saying it could change what I was seeing. But it didn't. It was his name. The man who had once been my boss, who had fired me 2 years ago without looking me in the eye. My pulse quickened. The ink looked fresh, darker than the rest of the text. Someone had added it after I'd signed. Someone wanted this there. I didn't understand how, but I knew one thing. It wasn't an accident. I folded the chart carefully, slid it into my bag, and looked back at my sleeping daughter. My grief wasn't just grief anymore. It had found direction. Outside, the clouds were breaking apart, the horizon streaked with weak sunlight. I started the car, my hands steady for the first time since the crash. If they wanted a father's signature, they were about to get one. By the time I reached Denver, the rain had turned into a thin mist that clung to the windshield like smoke. My gas light blinked red, but I didn't stop. I didn't even look for a station. I just kept driving until the road signs turned familiar. Broadway, Spear, 17th. I knew these streets better than I wanted to. They were part of another life, one I'd buried 2 years ago when I walked out of Voss Biotech for the last time. The hospital chart sat on the passenger seat, its edges soft from being gripped too tightly. I'd stared at that one name, Redden Voss, so long that the letters started to blur. I could still hear his voice in my head, calm and measured, the way he used to talk when he thought I was too naive to catch his meaning. "You'll always have a place here, Vera. You're like family." Family. That word felt filthy now. Downtown Denver was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled past, coffee shops flickered open, and the sky carried that early morning gray that always felt like unfinished business. When I saw the glass tower of Voss Biotech appear through the haze, I pulled to the curb. It was still the same, sleek, perfect, heartless. I sat there for a long minute, watching people walk in and out, men in suits, women clutching lattes, all moving with purpose. None of them had any idea that the man they worked for had just been named as the legal father of a dying child who wasn't his. I got out, locked the car, and walked inside. The lobby floor gleamed so much it reflected my face back at me, drawn, sleepless, unrecognizable. The receptionist looked up from her computer. She froze when she saw me. "Miss Rowe?" I smiled faintly. "Still remember me?" She hesitated. "It's been a while. What are you doing here?" "I need to see Mr. Voss," I said. Her professional smile returned like armor. "He's not available?" "You can leave a message." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Tell him it's about paternity." The words hung in the air like static. Her eyes widened, the phone halfway to her ear. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said quietly. "Paternity? He'll want to talk." The silence stretched. The security guard standing near the elevators shifted, his hand brushing his radio. I could see the calculation in the receptionist's eyes, risk versus procedure. And, as always in places like this, procedure won. "Ma'am," the guard said firmly, "you'll have to leave." I let them escort me out. But as the doors closed behind me, I saw him through the glass. Redan Voss. Perfect suit, fresh haircut, holding a cup of coffee while he laughed with two investors. His hand gestures were smooth, confident, like someone who believed the world still belonged to him. I stood in the cold wind and watched him smile, the same smile that once convinced me he cared about people, not just profits. That same man had signed termination papers that sent me home with nothing but a box of office supplies and a hollow promise, and now his name was written over my daughter's life. I walked back to the car, shaking, not from the cold this time. I didn't have answers, but I knew where to start looking. Elric's office was only 6 blocks away, a small law firm tucked between a bank and a dry cleaner. He used to handle contracts for Voss Biotech before he quit in disgust over creative accounting. I trusted him, not entirely, but enough. He looked startled when he saw me. "Vera, what happened to you? Do you have a minute?" His office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. I handed him the hospital chart, tapping the name. "Someone used this to deny my daughter emergency care. They said this man was the legal guardian." He frowned, slid on his glasses, and read the page. "Redan Voss?" "Yes." He turned to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Give me a second." "I still have access to the state medical database." The silence stretched. My heartbeat filled the room. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. "It's there." The hospital record lists Voss as the verified guardian. The authorization was digitally signed 2 weeks ago. My mouth went dry. But how? His credentials were used. The signature matches his system ID. Either he did it, or someone inside did, using his access. I gripped the edge of the desk. So they denied my daughter care because they thought I wasn't her mother? He nodded slowly. "They treated you like property without a label, legally invisible." Invisible. The word stung. I'd fought for everything in my life, my job, my child, my dignity, and now, in one digital stroke, I'd been erased. I stood up, pacing. "Can I prove it?" "Not yet," he said carefully. "But if you're right, there's a trail. Whoever logged that authorization had to use the hospital's central system. That means an IP record, timestamps, and internal memos. I can help you get them, but you have to be careful. These people don't make small mistakes." I nodded, trying to breathe evenly. Through the blinds, I could see people walking by on the street, all of them living in a world that still made sense. Mine had cracked wide open. When I left his office, I walked past the janitor's closet. A boy, barely 20, stood there getting scolded by his supervisor. "You're replaceable. You got that? Don't think one mistake means you're special." The kid lowered his head. "Yes, sir." I stopped in the hallway, watching him. That word, replaceable, hung in the air like poison. I remembered hearing it once, whispered in an executive meeting. "If Vera quits, we'll find another. People are replaceable." But children aren't. Families aren't. As I walked out into the morning sun, I whispered to myself, 2 people make a home. Lucine and me. That's all I had, and all I needed. The traffic roared as I stepped off the curb, but the noise no longer scared me. My fear had burned out. What was left was purpose. I wasn't going to ask for their mercy. I was going to make them remember my name. The sun had barely risen, but I'd been awake for hours. I sat in a corner booth of a coffee shop downtown, laptop open, rain still dripping from the ends of my hair. The city outside was coming alive, commuters rushing, horns blaring, but my world had narrowed down to the small screen in front of me and the folded tissue lying beside my cup. The blood on it had darkened to brown. It wasn't just a stain anymore. It was proof of everything I'd lost, and everything I still had to fight for. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed the subject line, "Hospital denies dying child emergency care." Then I started writing. Each word felt like reclaiming a piece of my own voice. I described what had happened, the refusal, the paperwork, the silence of the people who could have saved her. I attached photos of the hospital chart, timestamps from my phone, even the voice memo I'd recorded that night. When I hit send, I didn't pick one journalist. I picked them all. Local reporters, national watchdogs, even a blog I'd once mocked for chasing scandals. Then I sat back and waited. The coffee had gone cold by the time my phone rang. The caller ID read Mara Linton, Denver Tribune. Her voice was steady, quick, professional. "Miss Rowe, I just saw your email. If what you're saying is true, the hospital violated both EMTALA and federal patient rights law." I could hear keys clicking in the background. "I need you on record," she continued. "With your permission, I'll verify your claims and start an investigation." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Going public meant opening every door I had kept closed. My name, my face, my daughter's. It meant people would question everything, my parenting, my sanity, my worth. I turned and looked at the small motel room across the street through the coffee shop window. Lucine was still there, sleeping peacefully, her tiny frame lost under a mountain of blankets. My fear burned away, leaving only one clear thought. Silence had already cost too much. "I'll go on record," I said. "Then let's meet," Mara replied. "I'll come to you." By noon, the first headlines appeared online. Hospital accused of denying child emergency care without legal father. Within an hour, the hospital released a statement. It wasn't an apology, it was an attack. They called me an unstable single mother who had refused to cooperate with medical staff. They claimed I had fled the facility against advice. Social media split down the middle. Some people defending me, others calling me delusional. The comments hit harder than I expected. "She's just looking for attention. Probably exaggerating for money. If the dad's name isn't on the birth certificate, what does she expect?" Every line was a fresh cut. I put the phone face down on the table, staring at the reflection of the tissue beside it. The blood looked darker in the daylight, like it had thickened with time. Then my phone buzzed again. No caller ID, just a text. "Stop this or you'll lose custody." I froze. The message was followed by a second line. "RV. Red and Voss." My stomach turned. The coffee in my throat tasted like metal. I read the words again, then deleted the message before I could think twice. Fear had no place left in me. That afternoon, Mara arrived at the same coffee shop. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, hair pulled into a bun, coat soaked from the rain. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and eyes that didn't waver. "I read everything," she said, sitting across from me. "I listened to your memo. I don't know how they thought they could bury this." I took a deep breath. "They already tried." She nodded slowly, pulling out a small recorder. Tell me what happened. Start from the beginning. So I did. Every word. Every scream that went unanswered, every minute that Lucine's life slipped away while they argued over forms. By the end, my throat hurt, but I felt lighter. When I finished, Mara pressed the recorder's stop button and looked at me with tears glimmering in her eyes. We're publishing this, Vera. They don't get to silence you. I opened my coat pocket and took out the folded tissue again. It was stiff, dried, fragile, like the memory of that night. I placed it into an envelope and wrote across the front in black ink, Evidence A. It wasn't a symbol of grief anymore. It was a declaration. By nightfall, the story had spread beyond Denver. My phone buzzed nonstop with notifications I didn't read. TV anchors debated the case, legal experts speculated, hashtags trended. But I didn't care about any of it. I wasn't watching the screens. I was sitting in my car across from the hospital, headlights off, watching the same glass doors where my cries had once echoed. Inside, I could see staff moving, doctors, nurses, lawyers, the same place that had chosen paperwork over humanity. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady now. I wasn't shaking anymore. They wanted a legal father, so I went to get one. By the time I reached Cherry Hills, the sun had slipped low, turning the sky a bruised shade of orange. The road curved through a neighborhood of manicured lawns and quiet money, the kind of place where even the silence felt expensive. His house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, 3 stories of glass, steel, and arrogance. I parked at the edge of the driveway, engine still running, my hands gripping the hospital file like a weapon. For a moment, I just stood there, rehearsing the words I'd practiced the entire drive. Calm, controlled, precise. But the second the heavy wooden doors opened, every word fled. He leaned against the doorframe like he'd been waiting. That same smirk, the one I used to mistake for kindness, spread across his face. Well, if it isn't my favorite ex-employee, he said, what brings you to my humble fortress? The sound of his voice made my stomach tighten. I forced myself to look him in the eye. Your name is on my daughter's medical file. For a split second, the smirk faltered. Then he laughed, a soft, dismissive sound that cut sharper than any insult. Administrative error? Happens all the time. I pushed past him before he could stop me. The marble floors gleamed under my boots, reflecting the chandeliers above. Everything about the place screamed perfection, cold, curated, lifeless. An error doesn't come with your digital signature, Redden, I said, holding up the file. He closed the door quietly behind us. You really should have stayed quiet, Vera. His tone was soft, too soft, the kind of calm that came before cruelty. You're out of your depth here. He began circling me like he used to during performance reviews, hands in his pockets, voice dripping with practiced empathy. You were always so emotional, he said. That's why you burned out. You could have had a career here, you know, but you couldn't handle pressure. Pressure? I snapped. You sabotaged me because I wouldn't play your game. And now you're using my daughter's name in a hospital file? He stopped walking. The smirk returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. You really think anyone's going to believe a disgruntled ex-employee over me? I sign a lot of things, Vera. I'm a generous man. I scanned the walls, and that's when I saw them. Rows of framed certificates, partnerships, donations. There it was. Voss Biotech, Charitable Donor Partnership, St. Gregory Medical Center. The air left my lungs. You fund them, I whispered. You own the system that refused my daughter care. He didn't deny it. He just smiled wider. That's how the world works, sweetheart. Money flows up, not down. Maybe one day you'll learn. For a second, old shame washed over me. The same feeling I'd carried when he'd spread rumors about me at work, calling me unstable, difficult, uncooperative. But that shame didn't stick this time. I'd already survived worse. I turned toward him, voice low and steady. You're going to come with me tomorrow. You're going to tell them your signature was fake. Or I'll make sure your donors, your board, and your wife know every word of this conversation. The word wife hit like a stone through glass. His face stiffened, that veneer of charm cracking. He slammed his hand down on the glass desk beside him, the surface splintering with a sharp crack. You think anyone will believe you over me? He growled. I stepped closer. They will, I said quietly. Because this time, I'm recording. I raised my phone, and the red light blinked in the reflection of the shattered desk. His eyes darted toward it, then back to me. For the first time, I saw something I'd never seen in him before. Fear. The silence that followed felt heavier than the air between us. He straightened his tie, trying to reclaim his mask of composure. Get out of my house, he said. His voice trembled just enough to make me smile. I walked toward the door without another word. On the way out, something caught my eye, a framed photograph on a side table. His wife, his 2 sons, all smiling on a beach somewhere. It was staged perfection, the kind of image people like him used to prove they had hearts. I stopped, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. I used to think power made you untouchable. Now I see it only makes you visible. Then I left. Outside, the evening air hit my face like freedom. The sky was bleeding color, streaks of red and purple fading into night. I slid into my car and replayed the recording. His voice filled the silence, calm, condescending, then breaking. Proof. I drove away slowly, headlights cutting through the growing dark. The phone in my lap glowed with the small red dot that could end him, but deep down, I knew. Men like Redden never surrendered quietly. By dawn, he'd already made his move. The pounding on the door came before the sun fully rose, sharp and deliberate. My first thought was the police, that somehow Redden had filed a complaint and they were here to arrest me. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw 2 strangers in gray suits. The woman held a badge up to the glass. Child Protective Services, ma'am. Open the door, please. My stomach dropped. What? I whispered, though there was no one to answer. Behind me, Lucine stirred, her tiny hand reaching for the blanket. I bent down, brushing her hair gently from her forehead. It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. I opened the door. The man, a tall, stiff figure with a tablet, didn't even greet me. Miss Rains, he said. We've received a report of child neglect and unstable behavior. Those words hit harder than a slap. Before I could process them, they were already inside. The woman went straight toward the bed where Lucine slept, her heels tapping on the worn carpet. How long have you been staying here? She asked. Does your daughter have any medical supervision? Excuse me, I said, my voice trembling but low. You can't just walk in. We're within legal right, ma'am, the man interrupted, flipping through his folder. This is an emergency welfare check. We've received credible information suggesting possible endangerment. Credible? The word rang in my ears. The woman scribbled something on her clipboard while glancing at Lucine. She looks underweight, she muttered. She's recovering, I snapped. You have no idea what she's been through. Then you'll want to cooperate, won't you? The man replied, calm and patronizing. Something about their tone, too rehearsed, too precise, made me look closer. As he flipped the folder shut, I caught a glimpse of a logo in the corner. St. Gregory Medical Center. My breath caught. And there it was, at the bottom of the page, a signature. Verified by donor representative, R.V. Redden Voss. The room spun. My throat tightened. He hadn't just threatened me, he'd filed a false report to get Lucine taken away. I wanted to scream, to tell them the truth, but Lucine had woken up. Her small voice cracked through the chaos. Mommy? I turned to her, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. Not even close. "You can't take her," I said quietly, turning back to them. "She's all I have." The woman didn't flinch. "Then you should have thought of that before going public, ma'am." She handed me a thin sheet of paper. "This is a notice of investigation. You'll be contacted for a follow-up. For now, keep your daughter under observation and refrain from media contact." Media contact. So that was it. They weren't here to protect my child. They were here to silence me. When they left, the door clicked shut like the end of a sentence. I stood there for a long moment before my knees gave out. I slid down the wall until I hit the floor, the notice trembling in my hands. The motel felt smaller than ever. The air thick, the hum of the fridge deafening. My phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. I picked it up, praying it was Elric or Mara, but the voice on the other end made my blood run cold. "You should have stayed quiet, Vera." Then silence. I sat there, clutching the phone, staring at the blood-stained tissue still lying on the nightstand. For a long time, I couldn't move. I couldn't cry. I couldn't even breathe properly. That night, Mara finally called. Her tone was urgent. "Voss's lawyers are accusing you of extortion," she said. "They're saying you threatened him for money in exchange for silence." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course they are. They're trying to discredit your recording," she continued. "They want to make it look doctored." I looked at Lucine, asleep again, her chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. "Then I'll give them something they can't erase," I said. The motel room was quiet except for the faint hum of passing cars. I sat down at the small desk, opened my laptop and began typing. Legal complaint forms. Affidavits. Elric had sent me templates before, back when I thought I'd never need them. Now I filled in every box with precision. Plaintiff, Vera Rains. Defendant, Redden Voss. Claim, defamation, falsified reporting, and interference with parental custody. The cursor blinked at the end of the page like a heartbeat. At my lowest point, something inside me shifted. The panic didn't vanish, but it found structure. "Focus," I whispered to Lucine, even though she was fast asleep. "You don't need a father's name to survive. You just need a mother who fights smart." I folded the blood-stained tissue into the same envelope where I kept the hospital file. It wasn't grief anymore, it was evidence, the price of silence, paid once and never again. When I finished drafting the documents, I pulled out my phone and typed one last message to Redden. "Tomorrow, I stop crying." Then I hit send. Outside, the neon motel sign flickered against the dawn sky. I could hear birds beginning to wake, the world moving on as if nothing had changed. But something had. By the next morning, Denver woke up to a headline no one saw coming. I didn't believe it at first. The motel TV flickered against the thin curtains, its sound too calm for what it showed. The anchor's voice was steady, almost cold. "Philanthropist and venture capitalist Redden Voss has been taken into custody amid allegations of fraud, falsified charity records, and obstruction of justice involving Denver General Hospital." I froze, a spoon halfway to my mouth. Lucine sat on my lap, her cereal forgotten. The picture on the screen made my hands tremble. There he was, Redden, standing in front of his glass mansion, wrists cuffed, face pale under the morning sun. His perfect composure, the one that once ruled boardrooms and silenced employees, was gone. Lucine pointed at the screen. "Mommy, that's the bad man." Her voice was so innocent, so matter-of-fact, that it broke something loose in me. I held her tighter, pressing my lips against her hair. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. That's him." My phone started buzzing non-stop. Mara, Elric, journalists I'd never met. The world that had ignored me was suddenly listening. Vera, Mara's voice came through, breathless with excitement. Your story triggered a federal inquiry. Someone from the hospital leaked internal memos, emails showing donor interference and falsified approvals. It's real. Everything you said. It's all coming out. I leaned back in the creaky chair, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Who leaked it? Anonymous tip, she said. But it's solid. The Attorney General's office confirmed they're investigating. You just blew open one of the biggest medical corruption cases in the state. The words echoed in the small room. I should have felt triumphant. I should have smiled. But instead, I just sat there, silent. It didn't feel like victory yet. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm, waiting for it to decide whether to move on or swallow you whole. By noon, new details poured in. They'd frozen Voss's assets. The hospital's board had issued emergency statements. Reporters camped outside his mansion, shouting questions he couldn't answer. Then came the voicemail. It was from an unfamiliar number, but the voice made me stop breathing. Vera, it's Elise, the night nurse. They're investigating everyone, including me. Please, I didn't know they'd go that far. I thought it was just paperwork. Her voice cracked. I'm so sorry. For a moment, I just listened to the quiet between her words. The same nurse who had turned away from me in that hallway now sounded terrified, stripped of all authority. It was the first time anyone from that hospital had spoken to me like a human being. That afternoon, I took Lucine to the park. The air smelled like wet grass and redemption. Children's laughter filled the space where fear had lived for weeks. Lucine ran across the playground, her laughter bubbling like music. I sat on the bench, watching her chase a red balloon that had escaped another child's hands. When she caught it, she turned and waved at me, her smile wide and free. You almost didn't get this day, I whispered to myself. My throat tightened. Justice doesn't erase what happened. It just stops the bleeding long enough to let you heal. The sun began to sink, turning the park golden. My phone buzzed again. It was Mara. There's talk of a press conference, she said. The Attorney General might want you there. The mother who started it all. I went silent. The idea of standing in front of cameras again made my stomach twist. I remembered the comments, the doubt, the cruelty of strangers hiding behind screens. But then I looked at Lucine, her small hands clutching the balloon, her laughter echoing through the park like a promise. I took a deep breath. Tell them I'll come, I said. But I'm not the story, she is. That night, after Lucine fell asleep, I opened the old envelope marked Evidence A. Inside was the blood-stained tissue, fragile and faded now. I added 2 more things, a hospital bracelet with Lucine's name and a handwritten note that read, Never let them decide whose life matters. I sealed the box and placed it in the bottom of my bag. It wasn't evidence anymore. It was a reminder of how close silence had come to destroying us and how far we'd come from it. As I sat by the window, the city lights flickered in the distance. The world was still broken, but for once the cracks were letting in light. I wasn't the same woman who had begged in a hospital corridor. I'd seen the machinery behind power, its greed, its arrogance, and I'd survived it. I'd become something stronger. When my phone buzzed again, I didn't flinch. It was a message from Mara. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Cameras will be rolling. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back one word. Good. They expected a tearful mother. What they got was a witness with evidence. The Denver Civic Auditorium was packed. Rows of journalists filled every seat, cameras glinting like restless eyes. The low hum of whispered speculation rolled through the air, blending with the soft clicking of pens and the flash of bulbs. I stood behind the curtain, hands slightly trembling, trying to steady my breathing. I'd dressed simply. Black blazer, clean shirt, no makeup heavy enough to hide the exhaustion under my eyes. I didn't want to look perfect. I wanted to look real. In my pocket, I could feel the small hospital bracelet, Lucine's, its edges smooth from being touched so often. That tiny piece of plastic felt heavier than any diamond. When the Attorney General walked onto the stage, the room went quiet. He spoke firmly, outlining the charges: fraud, obstruction, falsified records. The words sounded clinical, but I knew what they really meant: deliberate cruelty. Then, after a pause, he turned to me. Miss Rains, would you like to say something? Every instinct told me to run, but I didn't. I walked forward, the sound of my heels echoing through the hall. When I reached the podium, I looked out at the sea of faces, strangers, skeptics, critics. And yet somewhere among them, I imagined the faces of the mothers who had ever been told their children didn't matter. My first words came out thin, barely above a whisper. They said my child's life needed a man's signature. The crowd leaned in. They said paperwork mattered more than breathing. A few gasps cut through the silence. I took a deep breath, and my voice steadied. But when a man with money lies, everyone signs for him. The flashes began again, rapid fire. I could hear reporters murmuring. The Attorney General nodded slightly, as if to tell me, keep going. So I did. I reached into my blazer and pulled out my phone. This, I said, is his voice. The recording played over the speakers, Redden's smooth, practiced tone unraveling into arrogance. You should have stayed quiet, Vera. You're out of your league. The sound echoed through the hall. Then the laughter, his laughter, the same one I'd heard in that glass house. Silence followed. Not the uneasy kind, but the heavy kind, the kind that marks a turning point. Then the room erupted. How long have you had this recording? Did you plan to expose him publicly? Are you suing for damages? I raised my hand. I'm not seeking revenge, I said calmly. I'm seeking accountability. And that shut them up. Then, from the back of the auditorium, a woman's voice broke through. She's telling the truth. Heads turned. Cameras swung around. A nurse's uniform peeked out from under a gray coat, the same nurse who'd walked away from me that night. Her face was pale, tears streaking down her cheeks. I was there that night, she said, her voice shaking. I heard her beg for help. I saw the chart. She took a few steps forward. I quit the next day. I couldn't live with what we did. No one spoke. For a moment, even the press forgot their notes. The Attorney General stepped forward. Thank you, ma'am, he said quietly. That will be recorded as testimony. It felt like something inside me loosened. The knot I'd been carrying for months finally giving way. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to release. The AG announced that the investigation would expand to include the hospital's leadership. My knees almost gave out, but not from fear. It was the weight of finally being heard. A journalist in the front row whispered to another, "She never even raised her voice." I almost smiled. That was the point. I didn't have to shout. The truth had its own volume. Sometimes, I said quietly into the microphone, justice doesn't need noise. Just truth. As the applause swelled, I stepped back. I didn't need to stay for the chaos that followed. Outside, my phone buzzed. An email notification from St. Anne Gregory Medical Center. Subject, reinstatement of claim, formal apology. I stared at it for a long time before closing the screen. My hands went instinctively to my pocket, touching Lucine's bracelet. We made it, baby, I whispered. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint hum of the city. It wasn't victory that filled my chest. It was peace. When I stepped through the auditorium doors, a car was waiting at the curb. Elric leaned against it, holding 2 coffees. In the back seat, Lucine was asleep, her small hand curled around a stuffed bear. He opened the passenger door for me. You did it, he said quietly. I looked at him, then at my daughter, her face soft in the glow of the dashboard light. "Not yet," I said. "There's still something I need to do." He nodded without asking what. Because forgiveness doesn't start when they say sorry. It starts when you decide to let go. The morning was quiet, painted in pale gold. The kind of light that made everything look softer, even the glass walls of Denver General Hospital. I parked near the same entrance I once stumbled through in desperation, clutching Lucine in my arms while begging for help. This time, I wasn't begging. Lucine's small hand rested in mine as the automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh. The smell of antiseptic hit me, sharp, sterile, but it didn't carry fear anymore. It was just air, clean and ordinary. The receptionist looked up from her desk, polite but curious. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I smiled faintly. "No, I just came to say thank you, for the ones who finally listened." She looked confused for a second, then nodded. "Well, you're welcome, I guess." We walked down the hallway, the same cold tiles that once echoed my panic. Back then, every step had felt like punishment. Today, they simply led forward. Lucine's sneakers squeaked softly as she skipped ahead, her ponytail bouncing. I watched her with quiet awe, her laughter returning to a place that once nearly broke both of us. We passed a nurse wheeling a tray of medication. She smiled at Lucine, and for a fleeting second, I thought she might be the same nurse from that night. Maybe not. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. When we reached the pediatric ICU, I paused. Through the window, I saw a young mother sitting by her child's bedside, tears streaming down her face. Nurses surrounded her, gentle, attentive. No hesitation, no clipboard, no father's signature. My breath caught. Something shifted inside me, a knot untying itself after months of tension. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I knew. My story had changed something. It hadn't just exposed corruption. It had saved lives I'd never know existed. I stood there, watching as one nurse placed a comforting hand on the woman's shoulder. A moment so small, yet it meant everything. It meant the system had finally learned to see, not titles, not forms, but people. Lucine tugged at my sleeve. "Mommy, are you okay?" I nodded, blinking away tears. "Yeah, baby. I'm okay now." Outside, we sat on a bench near the hospital garden. The same wind that once felt cruel now felt like release. I turned to her. "Do you remember what you told me that night, when you said you thought I was weak?" Her little face flushed. "I didn't mean it," she murmured. "I know." I smiled. "And you were wrong. But that's okay. I was wrong too. I thought being quiet would keep us safe. It never does." She climbed into my lap, wrapping her arms around my neck. "You're the bravest person I know, Mom." Her words weren't dramatic. They were simple, almost whispered, but they landed deeper than any applause I'd heard this week. From my bag, I took out the small box. Inside was the blood-stained tissue and Lucine's hospital bracelet. I opened it slowly, the morning sun catching the glass edge of the box. The tissue was fragile now, its crimson faded to a soft brown. "This is where it ends," I whispered. I stood and walked toward the small stream running through the hospital's garden, the same one I'd never noticed before. The water shimmered in the sunlight. I released the tissue into the current. It floated gently, twisting, turning, before drifting away. The red became gold as it caught the light. The stain that once marked despair now reflected something else. Peace. I exhaled. For the first time in years, my lungs didn't ache. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Mara. "Public support is pouring in. People are sharing your speech everywhere." I typed back, "Tell them it wasn't a speech. It was a goodbye." As I slipped the phone away, Lucine tugged at my sleeve again. "Can we go now, Mommy? I'm hungry." I laughed softly. Sure. What do you want for breakfast? Pancakes, she said instantly, grinning. We walked toward the parking lot hand in hand, the hospital fading behind us. The sunlight warmed our faces, the air smelled faintly of rain, and everything, for once, felt simple. As I started the car, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The glass building stood there, cold but harmless. They once said I was just a woman without a man, I said quietly. Lucine tilted her head. What does that mean? It means they were wrong, I said, smiling at her reflection. Turns out I never needed one. I just needed to remember who I was. She nodded solemnly, as if that made perfect sense to her 6-year-old mind. We drove away, the morning sun rising higher behind us, the city waking to a new day, because sometimes justice isn't loud. It's the silence that follows when the truth finally speaks for itself,